Today we are talking with D.R. Jones here at the Law School at the University of Memphis. D.R. is the Associate Dean for
Information
Resources. I apologize for messing that up. She is also Director of the Law Library and Assistant Professor of Law. D.R., you came here to the university in 2008. As is sort of our custom in these interviews, could we perhaps briefly talk about your background, both when you were young and what your life is like today?
Sure. I was born in Opelika, Alabama. My father was finishing his engineering degree at Auburn, and we did not live in Alabama very long. He just finished his degree right after I was born. He did have family connections to Alabama, but we didn't stay there. My mother is a native of Key West, Florida.
Uh-huh.
And so we did move to Key West for a short time, but with his degree and so forth, he ended up taking a job with Westinghouse. And so we began to move. And my family moved quite a bit when I was growing up. My mother did not work, so it was mainly my father's job when he was being transferred. And I went to high school at Miami Beach, senior high. That was a really great opportunity for me. I was able to participate in the drama and the speech and debate program there, those were excellent programs. And I was really able to develop the skills I still use today. Whenever I teach or I do a presentation, I'm drawing on the skills, for example, from extemporaneous speaking. Mm-hmm. And my participation in that, I was state champion. So, but I still, those skills are still with me today. But that was just one stop on the way. My family continued to move even after I went to high school, and I have moved on my own. I've lived in 12 states. So moving to me is really not something that's a real burden, I guess. It's a change, and moving is just part of my life. Mm-hmm. I identify with a lot of different places, either because I've lived there or my family connections, like Key West, but I don't really have a hometown. My home is where I am, mm-hmm. where I'm living, and of course right now that is in Memphis, mm-hmm. And I'm enjoying living here. So.
You mentioned Key West.
Yes.
This is not in our preliminary conversation, so
Yeah.
I'm bringing it up for the first time. But,
yeah.
Those who've watched a few of these interviews may have figured out that I travel around sort of on private trips.
Right.
And do interviews sort of in conjunction with those. And
yes.
This is one such trip. I have a friend from college who lives in Fort Lauderdale.
Yes.
And one of the beauties of this time of the year is that unlike the rest of the country, it's nice and warm but not humid down here yet.
Yes.
We're talking about March, and I'm visiting him on this trip and also stopping here in Memphis and a few other places to talk to a few of our colleagues for this history. And one of the things that my friend Ken and I are going to do while we're there is drive out to Key West for about 3 days.
Wonderful. Down to make the drive.
Yeah, I have never actually been in the Keys.
Yes.
And, he once lived out there shortly after he retired some years ago, but I'm looking forward to seeing the place.
Yes, it's also great that you're driving down because you get to see the overseas highway, which was built after the railroad was destroyed in the 35 hurricane.
Yeah, I believe that was a hurricane.
Yeah.
Since it's March, I figure it's not hurricane season.
No, it's definitely not. And it's not quite as hot as it eventually does get. So it's a good time to get.
I understand it gets pretty warm and pretty humid down there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful place to visit. So I think you'll enjoy it very much.
Well, speaking of places, I noticed in your background that you studied to become a law librarian with Penny Hazelton at the University of Washington in Seattle. Sort of with that note, could you talk about your educational background and your other degrees and perhaps that one and where you got them?
Sure. I received my bachelor's degree in economics and political science from Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And when I went to college, I knew at that time that I wanted to go to law school, and was thinking about where to go. I was originally very interested in going to law school in Washington, D.C. I visited there. I thought this would be a place to go. And I was accepted at Georgetown, American, so we almost were working together, and some other law schools there. But Mercer gave me a full 3-year scholarship to attend the law school there.
That would be a fairly
It is a very big incentive.
Good reason for such a thing.
I also wanted to practice law in Georgia, so I thought that was a good reason to go there as well. And the school was moving. Moving is a kind of an ongoing theme in my life. The school was moving from the main campus into another building, a renovated, wonderful building, and was really, I think, in a time of very positive change. And so I thought that would be really the opportunity I should take. I did go to law school at Mercer and was very successful. I was managing editor of Law Review and the court and so forth. And then did go to Atlanta, of course, to practice law initially.
Now, a good friend of mine, maybe of yours, Leah Chanin, was at Mercer for many years as director. Was she still there when you were
Yes, she was the director. She was the director at that time.
She was a legendary director, president of ALL during those years. And she now lives in the Washington, D.C. area. After she retired from Mercer, she came back to D.C.
Right.
And actually was director, I believe, the D.C. School of Law for a while.
I know she was
she's
up
worked
in that
at
area.
Howard,
Howard,
too.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
yes, she was definitely there while I was there.
That's interesting. Let's talk about your career in law librarianship. You mentioned, of course, here at the university, which is your primary focus now, I understand. Obviously, it would be. How
it's
was
quite a
it that
transition.
you decided to become a law librarian? I mean, you were at Mercer as a law student. You talked about practicing law in Georgia.
Yeah.
Being in law librarianship is a bit of a switch. How did you decide to do that?
Yeah, I thought I might talk about that because it is quite a change from practicing law to eventually ending up, of course, being not only a law librarian but a director. And there were really a number of factors, 3 factors really, I think, that influenced me to ultimately become a law librarian. But before that, I had to, of course, decide to leave the practice of law, and I practiced law for 7 years. After graduation, I did carry through on my intent, and I was a corporate securities and banking attorney in Atlanta with a large firm and then a more of a specialized firm. I was working 70 to 100 hours a week, very long hours, but it wasn't just the hours that I was spending in my work. It was that if I was going to put that much time into working, I wanted it to be something that I cared about and that I felt that I was making some sort of a difference and really that I enjoyed. And I still work long hours. I mean, I work 7 days a week in now and in other jobs I've had. So it wasn't just the hours. And so I started thinking about, well, what else could I do then, certainly with my background. And I took one of those tests where you find out what kind of jobs are appropriate for you based on your skills and interest. And that test, of course, revealed that I should be a lawyer. But it also listed librarian, which is something I hadn't really thought about. But as we've just discussed, I had a very good model for a librarian. I immediately thought of Leah Chanin.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and she was more, though, than just, well, being a director is a big job, but she was a professor at the law school. She taught professional responsibility.
I think she served a period as dean, too.
Yeah, I mean,
we were looking for an interim dean. She had a number of roles, and she also had practiced law. So I really identified with her, and of course her varied activities
that she had done in her career, but also the variety of the type of work that she was doing at the law school. And I thought, well, that's what I would like to be. That's the type of job I would be interested in. And another factor, so that's one factor, of course, a role model, perhaps not in a direct influence, but a model. Another factor was technology. I was one of the first attorneys in my firm to have a desktop computer. And the firms in the 1980s had computers. They were starting to introduce computers initially as word processing pools and
Oh, I remember those days. Yeah, you couldn't call him the computer in front of the salesman. He'd be sure it would destroy all his prospects in the sales.
But then secretaries started getting computers, and they were starting to move toward desktop computers. But it was very suspicious for attorneys to have computers because you had to type.
Oh, yes.
And
we
now,
call it keyboarding more recently to
yeah,
try and cover up what it really is.
Now no one thinks about that. Yeah. But at the time, typing was considered a low-level skill. And an attorney would not type, so it was somewhat suspicious. But the managing partner and I shared a secretary. He wanted to use computers for his work and financial management. I was very excited about using a computer because it would give me control, because I was having to handwrite everything, and it took several secretaries to type off all this stuff, and of course I was working at all these hours, so I could control my work. So I became very interested in computers. I started using the computer, of course, in the firm, and I was interested in applications. I learned that librarians were using computers, and they were really cutting edge in using technology.
They had Lexis at that point.
Yeah.
Westlaw was developing, and many other databases.
Many other databases.
Yeah.
So that was another very strong attraction. And finally, I learned about this law librarianship program at the University of Washington, best in the country, in Seattle, which I had visited. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to go for this program. It sounds exactly like what I might want to do. And of course, again, change and moving to me was not particularly a big issue.
A bit of a change from Georgia to Washington State.
Yeah, but I moved quite a bit. I've lived in, I think I mentioned this, but 12 states. So so moving was just part of it was an opportunity, I guess. So changing an environment wasn't really that dramatic, I guess. For me, it might seem that way to other people. So that's how I made the initial switch, and then of course began working my way up through various jobs, starting at Lewis and Clark, Northwestern School of Law, working with George Pike there, being a reference librarian, head of reference, working with technology and in the classroom and so forth. I also did an experiment and taught lawyering skills for a few years. That was my experiment to see if I wanted to stay in law librarianship or perhaps teach research and writing full time. Another option, obviously, that I could take. And I went to University of San Diego. I was teaching there for a couple of years, but I really liked law librarianship, the variety again, the different kinds of work. I like management and that kind of activity. So when the job at Case Western opened in Cleveland, I took that job, head of public services, eventually became deputy director. And again, a move, but moving change to me is just part of the opportunity. And to bring this full circle, or bring it back to now, the long route here, I wanted to be a director, and I am now. And you mentioned, so what am I doing now? As director, I came when the law school was moving. The University of Memphis, the law school had been on the main campus and was about to move in a year. It took maybe a year and several months, but was about to move downtown into a renovated building. And that process was of course in its final stages. And that was a very exciting time. I was very drawn to that. Of course, to do the move and relocate, be involved at least in the final stages of planning the internal decisions. A lot of the physical layout had already been done, but still a lot of decisions to make. A time of change. The law school was not just moving, but the faculty was changing. We have newer faculty, and it was a very positive time. Now, I think that there are people who would not choose to do that.
I'm sure you're right.
To come into a situation, even a very positive situation, and take on a move and come into a place that was in a period of change. I thought that was great because I like the idea of coming in and being part of the change. So it was a very good opportunity. We did move. You've seen some of our building.
Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago, this building downtown, I think you phrased it, but
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that. I mean, you gave me the Cook's tour,
Yes.
and this is really a spectacular place. It's an old courthouse,
Yes.
and I'll let you take it from there.
It's the courthouse. It's a federal courthouse, post office, and customs house. It originally was built. In the original part, at least, was built in the 1880s and served in these roles at that time. In 1906, they added on a part to it, and then finally in the early 1930s is when they built the remainder of the building, kind of encapsulated, as they say, the building. And it has served all the way up until 2008. It was, it's had its post office role, and it certainly was a courthouse. Including there have been a number of cases, of course, civil rights cases and other important cases held here until the courts moved out of the building, served as the customs house. So it has a lot of historical significance, but the architecture is extraordinary. We retained a lot of the 1880s architecture and the other period of time, the architecture from the period of time. It's an extraordinary repurposing of a building. It's won a lot of awards. And it tripled the size of the law school space. And it also is right on the river. It is directly, we checked the view, it's directly overlooking the river. We are, of course, downtown. We have an extraordinary amount of support from the local bar and our alumni. They're very engaged and interactive with us. And being downtown, of course, has enhanced that relationship. So it's a very exciting place to be. We're still expanding some of our programs and so forth. But the move was certainly a part of that very positive change. So
many years ago, I went through the same kind of thing, a new building. It was, in fact, a year after I arrived at the University of Houston. And it transformed the school. I mean, suddenly there was space for programs, more faculty could come on board, there were places for offices, places to teach students, and state-of-the-art classrooms. You've got all that here, too.
yes.
I mean, you did quite a job of renovation, building the classrooms. And
Right.
they're modern, exactly what you would expect to see in the 21st century type classrooms.
Right. So they were able to blend both the modern with the historic. And of course, they were also able to put in the extraordinary infrastructure that you have to have for a modern building. We have full wireless, of course, compliance with many different kinds of codes and so forth. Power structure, the power infrastructure, of course, missing from an old building.
Use a bit more electricity today than perhaps a few years after the building was first built.
The heating and cooling, of course, are important.
Yeah.
So a lot of infrastructure and so forth, but I had the opportunity, though, to work with some of that finalization, that blend. For example, the furniture, blending the more traditional with the modern, to serve our needs. So it's really been a very
Well, I think you know,
functional.
I may be condescending saying this, but it's really a very impressive place.
Oh, yes.
I think so. And even coming in the main lobby down there with the old courthouse appearance with
Yes.
the marble and so on, it's really very special.
It is an extraordinary building,
Yeah.
and yet and serves us very well. And we've had the Tennessee Supreme Court here. I mean, it still even has some court functions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a wonderful place to work, and I think to provide education for students.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I'm running the other parts to running the library, collection, personnel, and so forth, and developing services as our programs expand. So that's one aspect of my work.
Well, another one is your teaching.
Yes.
You've continued to do that, indeed, and you already know because I told you earlier today that one of the reasons that I approached you about possibly being part of our history is
Yes.
that rather excellent article you wrote for the Law Library Journal. At least I think it was excellent, and I think others do, talking about how the shift in from book media to digital media has changed the equation. You came at it originally as an expert in copyright law, but in the article you point out that there's been a shift from the traditional, you own the books and under the copyright law you have certain fair use
Right.
rights. Now you sort of lease the books or you contract as to what your rights may or may not be. And it's changed. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Perhaps your teaching and your expertise, and especially in copyright.
Sure. I think I'll start with the teaching
All right.
and talk about, because that really relates to libraries,
Mhm.
libraries and copyright, and how I came to develop this expertise. And then I'll talk a bit about the article and about the discussion there. Librarians and libraries and copyright are totally intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that copyright is just some interest of librarians. It is what we do. As I like to say, I practice what I teach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of every day when libraries lend books, when you interlibrary loan, and when you agree to have a database, sign to have a database. Whatever you're doing, copyright is always there. It is a part of what we do. And so for the 20-some years that I've been a law librarian, of course, copyright has been a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very clear early on that was an area where I really needed to be aware of the law and developments. Of course, the last 20 years have been a very volatile time in copyright in many areas, but in ways that have affected libraries, certainly. And I followed that through this time. Changes in the law itself, case law developments, even very recently, of course, a number of cases pending even now that are related to libraries and published works. Google Books, HathiTrust, Georgia State case, a number of pending cases. The Kurtzsang case that was before the Supreme Court last year, although not directly involving libraries, certainly something that was of concern. So copyright and libraries, those are very much intertwined. And we do have actually a number of law librarians and librarians who have been very active in advocating for change in the law, discussing copyright, and have been involved in different ways in the evolution of copyright. So I have this grounding, I guess. And I had the opportunity when I came here that the professor who was teaching copyright was retired.
Mm-hmm.
And our dean here, Dean Kevin Smith at the time, I offered to teach, given my expertise and interest, and he agreed. It is a very dynamic and exciting area because of the constant development. And I have been able to then tie together my teaching,
Mhm.
my work, which I do, and which of course involves copyright, my scholarship, and even my service, which we'll probably talk about a bit later. But
Mhm.
even my service is tied into this, and I can bring all of these facets together when I teach. So, and my constant work to keep up with what's going on and my involvement really overlaps into all these areas. So that's the expertise. The article, and the article is about academic libraries primarily, which include law libraries, and
Sure.
scholarly works. And libraries have a very multifaceted mission. They preserve knowledge, they provide access to knowledge, they organize knowledge, they facilitate the creation of knowledge. As you build on what's gone before.
Mhm.
And digital works can help with all of those areas, potentially. Having digital works can greatly enhance the ability of libraries to meet those different aspects of that mission.
Mhm.
But publishers, those who hold the copyright, have chosen, as you were alluding to, have chosen a model, a business model for these types of works that really changes the way that libraries can provide access to these materials.
Mhm.
And people think of libraries and copyright, and they often think of copying, making copies.
Mhm.
But what many people don't realize is that in order for a library to lend a book, there has to be an exception in the copyright law. Because the rights of copyright holders are such that a copyright holder controls any disposition of a work.
Mhm.
That includes a sale, of course, but it includes lending. And so the library, in order to even just lend a work or allow someone to use it, needs an exception, and that's for sale. So the library purchases the work, possesses it, and then can decide to lend it to anyone, can decide how it will be used. And that's fine with print works. That's the model, is that libraries purchase these works and they continue to possess them physically. But with digital works, the model has changed. And this could be electronic journals, it can be electronic books, it's any kind of digital work. Copyright holders have choices as to how they can control their works, control access, and protect their rights. They can rely on the law, but they can make other choices. And one of those choices is to rely on contract and licensing. If a library licenses a work, then for sale would not apply.
Mhm.
That library is under the terms of the contract instead. And as I discuss in the article, the contracts now, the licenses often have restrictions on use and lending, such as interlibrary loan.
Mhm.
And there are other kinds of restrictions and control factors that are limiting access to these and the use of these works that affect this broad mission. And so that's of concern because libraries are getting in the position where, as I say, there's a locked collection. You
Mhm.
can't lend something and you can't borrow. And I have examples in the article of these situations. That at a time when we should have this broad access available, this way of providing broad access, of preservation, and meeting these other parts of our mission, we're being limited. There's limitations, and it's like a constriction when there should be expansion. We have the ability for global access, potentially.
I mean, it's wonderful, the technology. In effect, the book is always on the shelf if you have
Yes,
a database,
yes.
unlike the old days when perhaps somebody put it in his office and forgot to tell the librarian. And
So-
yet, it's now restricted in new ways.
It may be restricted. Also, issues of pricing and other kinds of controls have served to add other constraints. But there's this opportunity to make works available for preservation that otherwise would be inaccessible potentially, or again accessible for only a limited number of people because of the physical limitation to get access. So a lot of potential here, but because of this model, there's constrictions. So the question is, what do we do about this? What do we do to ensure access? It is critical that we ensure access to really the body of scholarly knowledge that's out there. And there are a number of different ways. I talk about the approaches really that libraries, of course, want access. They can take the same approaches as those who want to control can take. You can't change the law. That's a slow process. Yeah. We are in the process of having some hearings and other action, and Congress is moving very slowly. The Copyright Office is issuing requests for comments, and we're holding roundtables. So there's discussion, and certainly we're participating in those discussions. Librarians are participating in those, but the law changes over time. There's engagement in licensing and contracts of proactively really thinking about what kinds of arrangements to make with regard to digital works. Mm-hmm. There's also collaboration, working with other libraries through consortia and so forth, because we can't change everything. I mean, we have to really be working in the system at the same time as trying to move forward. And of course, I do talk about open access and other ways of possibly moving this, shifting the entire picture with scholarly works, which is part of a broader picture actually, that the scholarly community is engaging in this examination of how to make these works more available. This isn't just about libraries; it's about the scholars themselves and making works of it. Making these works accessible, making them accessible to people. So the article again outlines this issue and the concerns, but what I really call for is engagement. Mm-hmm. The engagement of librarians, and I quote Frederick Kilgore, who founded OCLC, of course, a major facilitator of access.
And cooperation between
libraries.
Cooperation,
exactly, a perfect model. And he said that librarians must be more willing not just to accept change, but to become its agents. Mm. Be proactive, engage, that whatever path we might take, we need to be engaged, because this is a critical mission that libraries have, and we have to get control back over this situation to meet this mission. So it does involve copyright, but it also involves much more than that. Yeah.
Well, it was a very fascinating article, and I certainly hope that many of our viewers will take the time to take a look at it.
Yes.
One of the advantages I have since I'm retired is I can actually read this stuff as it comes in. In the old days, I might not have had so much time, but some very interesting things in your pieces right there.
I did, part of it was some historical research as well into the development actually of libraries and accessibility to works through initially the invention of photocopying and so forth. So I recommend that part as well for those who want to see how this has been really a long time. The development of interlibrary loan, for example, in the late 19th century and so forth. But the change in libraries and the focus of having to focus now on just what do we need. So another aspect of the article, the historical basis, but of course bringing us to the current time. And I do encourage people to read it consider what they might be able to do.
Now, your writing goes beyond, of course, this one article.
Yes.
You've done a number of other pieces. You want to talk a little bit about some of
Yeah, my scholarship focuses in a very broad sense on access to information and the effect of technology on that access and the kind of tensions that have come about in certain areas as you try to provide access, but then technology adds other elements. Copyright, of course, is one of those areas which is all about control and access, and I'm writing about that area, but privacy is another area that I've written about privacy issues. And an earlier article of mine focuses on access to state court records, online access to state court records, which was actually a topic that I became aware of at an AALL program that Judy Meadows, the state law librarian of Montana,
yes,
was very active in Montana in addressing these issues of online records. And I became aware of those issues and then eventually wrote this article. And it's a classic example again. There's a policy we have in this country of access, of providing public access to public records, such as court records. But when you put them online, that of course expands access. That's wonderful. But they contain a lot of personal information.
Yeah.
And you're really changing the dynamic of how you get access to that information. And so how do we go about protecting privacy while providing access? Many people are concerned, of course, about the government having access to information.
Certainly has been on the news of late.
A hot topic lately, but the government having access, and what would the government do with this information? But a very disconcerting topic, a very big problem actually, is not the government, it's third parties. What are third parties doing with this information? And they are already using it. They're mining these resources such as public records and putting this information together about individuals. And that's what I also discuss in the article, is how this information is being used. They're taking the information out of context, essentially, out of its context of this court case and so forth, and just using it in for other purposes. So the question then is, what do we do? How do we address this? Again, not an easy issue to address. In my article, I discuss one state that's adopted a means of really revising all their filings to limit the amount of information that's in these records. I mean, one approach. But privacy is another area that certainly is linked very much with libraries and access to information. So again, it is an area which librarians should engage in.
I remember when after the attack in New York back in 2001, 9/11, the Patriot Act came in, and one of the things was to require that libraries would divulge certain information about who was borrowing what. And I remember we were very concerned.
The librarians have always been strong defenders of privacy, not just law librarians, but all librarians have always been defenders of privacy on many levels regarding patron materials, and of course this extends law librarians work in many kinds of areas, and they handle public records and other kinds of materials that contain personal information. So it's certainly even privacy issues now with regard to ebooks that you can track, or online research, you can track this information. Someone can track it. And so it certainly is a very important area when I've focused on this one particular issue, but that's another area that I hope to continue in, along with copyright, is of critical importance.
Let me tell you a story about myself and privacy. When I was in law school, one of the faculty members would come to the library. We had in those days a set of materials on reserve, and you had to check them out, sign a card. And he would come in to see if his students were reading, by signing these things out, the materials that he had suggested they read.
Right.
Well, we picked up on what that was all about, and we used to put the books out on the table in front of the cert desk, and everyone would come along from the class and sign the cards. So come in, everybody's names down there. Looked like, they were reading them like crazy.
Right.
But it was a version of privacy, and I felt as a student that was inappropriate on his part.
Yeah. So there's
So I basically connived with the other desk attendants to make sure it didn't work.
Exactly.
At least not as he thought it would.
Exactly. Yeah, just there is that underlying concern.
Mhm.
Librarians are very sensitive to that, and I think have something to say.
Yeah.
I think they do about
Well, I
the
can
issue.
understand, people that are selling things want to know a lot about their customers, so
Right.
that they can target the advertising. And
Exactly.
certainly Amazon does it quite effectively. I mean, if I buy anything there, or even look at something, I start getting reminders that this is available if I want to buy it. from them.
The tracking is definitely there, and it can be, of course, supposedly to help you, but it can also, when pulled apart again out of a context that it's in, it can be also very damaging, potentially, especially when employers are looking at this information, or others.
I understand people are being told to be very careful what they say about themselves on Facebook and
Yeah.
other social media, because a lot of employers go to look at that stuff and
Right.
make their decisions based on what they think they're seeing.
So, and it ties back again, though, as you say, to our records. What are
Mhm.
people using in the library? Well, you could protect someone physically checked out a book, but what about if it's online? What are people accessing
Yeah.
and reading? How can that possibly be tracked? And
That was part of what Congress wanted to be able to do after all the concerns were raised after the 9/11
Right.
attacks.
right, let's track what people are reading.
Yeah.
What are they accessing?
Spot the ones that are likely to go beyond reading, I guess.
So,
Oh, well.
So these are areas, though, and I've chosen to, of course, scholarship to write and present on these subjects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a lot more than just scholarship. I'm
Yes.
thinking now I'm sort of changing the focus perhaps to service to the
Service.
profession, both within the associations. You were elected at one time president of the Western Pacific chapter. You've chaired committees for the AELL and perhaps chapters. You've probably done some things on campus. I understand today at the faculty meeting you were taking the minutes.
And I was reelected as faculty senator.
And you're a senator.
Yes, I'm faculty senator.
Well, that'd be
And
nice
I
to
know,
you.
I think you've
I
had
did
some
that.
service in the university
Yeah,
senate.
the law faculty at American was most delighted that I would do this,
I
and they didn't
see
have
that.
to.
It seems to
The
be.
truth be told, but I enjoyed it, and it was useful.
Yeah.
You get into things that are very important.
It's a broader picture. You
Yeah.
see a much broader picture and perspective of the institution if you are a part of a larger institution when you serve in these roles in the university. And so I'm a faculty senator and, of course, part of the law faculty, a tenure track member and engaged with the faculty. And have served on a number of committees, self-study. I'm not sure
you got
you're
the
very-
short straw on that
that
one,
was
huh?
when I first arrived here, in fact,
Yeah.
self-study. Of course, the relocation of the law school itself, I was very engaged, not just with people in the law school, but actually the whole university of trying, because we're off campus, of trying to figure out how all these services would come together now at the law school. And have been on a number of other kinds of committees, of course, in the university, either through the Senate, which has committees, or our, of course, internal faculty committees, curriculum, and so forth. but I also have, of course, a lot of my service is through organizations. When I was in Ohio, OhioLink, a fantastic consortium. And I'm also we've joined Malco, another consortium, and I'm now working through that, as I talk about again in my article, the importance of working through consortia and other cooperative arrangements and with other libraries. And so I've been engaged in that. And of course ALL, as you mentioned, chapter president. I've been chair of SIS. I've also been SAS council chair, which is a representative to the executive board. So that was really a wonderful opportunity I had for service to represent a group toward and be part of the executive board, not on the executive, but you're at the meetings and part of the representative to the board. And of course, chaired committees, I am the incoming chair of the copyright committee. Yes, as I said.
Following in the footsteps of some very good colleagues like Lolly Gassaway over the years and others.
Yes.
Who developed in their era. I guess Lolly's not retired, I can call it that. Same kinds of activities and expertise.
As I said, it connects all back together with my teaching, my scholarship. And I'm the incoming chair, been serving on the committee, of course, leading up to this. And this type of committee particularly is especially rewarding because of our activities. We on behalf of of ALL, we provided comments on orphan works. The Copyright Office has been soliciting comments on these various areas. One was orphan works, and we did provide comments. We were joined by MLA and SLA in that. And I'm working right now, in fact, on additional comments to provide to the Copyright Office. And of course, we're working with government relations at ALL, absolutely. But it's direct engagement. I mean, actually being a part of the evolution of the law, and not just watching it go by, but actually engaging.
You're not a spectator.
No,
you're a participant.
No, we are. And so that type of service has been very rewarding. Another committee that I'm chairing now is the Research and Scholarship Committee, which is a committee of the academic SIS. And this is a new committee. I actually was the one who pushed to have this committee created a few years ago. And its purpose is to support law librarians, not just academic librarians, law librarians, but all librarians in their writing and scholarship. And we've set up a mentor-mentee program to connect people who are interested in writing with people who can advise them. The idea is, again, engagement, that scholarship and writing are very important parts of what librarians do. And this committee is a way to facilitate getting people support who are interested in scholarship and writing, and many librarians. It's not just the fuller length type law review articles, but any kind of articles that people, writings that people are doing. So it's very exciting to see some work through that committee and supporting people. So I would feel, I don't know, if I didn't have any service, that's just sort of part of what I do, is work through these various types of activities and providing service.
One of the real advantages I always felt of being involved in committee work and other service was getting to know colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful people out there.
Oh, extraordinary people to work with. And I've worked with so many people over the years, and now some of our newer members, just extraordinary people who are doing really wonderful work for the profession and their organizations.
Let me shift gears a tiny bit. One of the things I always like to do is steal good ideas from others if I can. Frank Hodek, who's also doing some of these conversations, has a question that is sort of standard in the interviews that he does, conversations he does, about asking you, if, even with all these other things you're doing, if you have time perhaps for other passions or interests, and if so, what things are
What
they?
might that be?
Yeah.
Well, I do try to get out, actually, and outdoors, and I like hiking and backpacking, and whatever kind of outdoor activity is available in the place I'm living.
Mhm.
I like to travel. I've visited all 50 states,
Ah.
which kind of comes with
I'm
moving.
working on that,
but
but,
I've done the 50 states, not just the airports, but actually
Yeah.
physically, I've been in all 50 states.
Mhm.
And so those are things kind of to get out. But my absolute passion, when I do have any time, is genealogy research.
Ah.
And I have developed a fair amount of expertise in
Mhm.
genealogy research, going back to kind of at a time when there was lesser accessibility through electronic resources. But it's just something I really care about. It's history to me, and it's, of course, personally connected, but so if I travel, I'll sometimes go sit in archives and libraries and read bad microfilm. So
You are a serious
I'm a serious researcher.
participant.
Yeah, I really enjoy it because it is history,
Uh-huh.
really, and it's, of course, but it's focused on individuals, history of our country, but tied to these people, and it ties you back into the history and events and so
Mhm.
forth. So that is so researching. So it's a big surprise, I guess.
Well, and a little different kind than you do
Yes.
normally on an everyday job.
Right,
Or-
but that's what I do enjoy doing. So
Well, we're sort of nearing the end of today's conversation, but it's sort of customary to ask if there's anything we haven't discussed that you would like to mention.
I think what I want to mention, I know what I want to mention here at the end, is to really reiterate something I've already alluded to, which is the importance of librarians being engaged, proactive and engaged. And by engagement, that can mean a lot of things. First of all, what should you be engaged, concerned about? Librarians are often associated with research and teaching research and developing, addressing issues of research, and that is important, and collections and research, teaching and so forth. But there are these other areas that are critical to libraries: privacy, copyright, information policy, access to information, access to justice. Those are all areas where librarians really need to be engaged, and many people are engaged from a lot of different kinds of libraries, state libraries and private firms, other kinds of libraries engaged on state, local, even, of course, federal level. We're engaged through our organization, ALL. Other librarians, of course, are engaged in activities, but I also think that engagement is scholarship and writing, and presenting these works to people besides librarians, of getting out and sharing ideas and being part of the conversation. Scholarship is a conversation. I've read that and had a scholarship is described as a conversation, and you're joining the conversation. And librarians really do have the knowledge of these areas. It's so much a part of what they do that they should engage. They should get involved in the conversation on some level. And as I said earlier, not just to accept change, to become its agents, to be part of change.
Well, perhaps on that note, I should thank you, D.R. Jones, for today's conversation. In thanking you, I'm thanking you on my own behalf, obviously, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor and privilege of putting together these series of conversations to comprise an oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf portion of Hein Online.
Yes, and I thank all of you, of course, you and the other people you mentioned, and of course Hein for being a sponsor of this whole endeavor.
Yeah.
So
Well, I have had a wonderful time up till now, and I will continue to as long as they'll let me. And going around and talking to people like yourself,
yes,
learning so much about not only what we do collectively, but who we are individually.
yes,
It's fascinating. And
yes.
thank you for being part of this today.
Thank you.